And welcome back to Wednesday Night Live for January 12th, 2016. Hope you had a pleasant weekend. Holidays are behind us. We have some holy days coming up, but for whatever good reason, we don't have any more shopping days to worry about unless you have a birthday or an anniversary or something like that. The crunch is off. And so as I do every week at this time, let me remind you about Compassion and Hope Pregnancy Center. Compassion and Hope Pregnancy Center is a Christ-centered nonprofit ministry offering life-affirming alternatives to abortion and compassionate care to those who face pregnancy and abortion-related issues. Very short statement of fact. That's their statement. If you can help a young mother or a person, a woman who is maybe in a little trouble, or she is in a position where she has had this unexpectedly and perhaps doesn't have some, a significant other that's helping her along, she could use your help. She could use your compassion and hope. And we're always about bringing life into the world. We're not Planned Parenthood. We don't live in the Holocaust region. We are Compassion and Hope. Won't you please call them at 208-478-HOPE, 478-HOPE. Give compassion and hope to a young mother who may be desperate or in dire need of your help. You'll be glad you did. She'll be glad you did. God will bless you. All right, well, boy, everything, it's like the world has been turned upside down in 2016. And on the way in, I was listening to Glenn Beck, and he announced that we have 2 more days Thursday, this coming Thursday, Sheikh Obama will give his final State of the Union address. Yeah! Our horrible nightmare is almost over. We can see light at the end of the tunnel. Right now, the light at the end of the tunnel is an oncoming Muslim, but at the end of the tunnel, in a year from now or so, there is hope. So we'll soon be done. Well, we've still got another year of his reckless abandon. And as he's made very clear, he has a phone, he has a pen, and he has absolutely no scruples, and he's willing to use both. And since he doesn't have to run for office, and apparently really isn't that impressed with taking care of his fellow Democrats, who knows what Sheikh Obama will do in the next 12 months. Just say your prayers and hope for the best. We're just about to get off of the international spotlight with the lunch lady. The lunch lady has said that she's not returning to the school. There was a brief article in the Wednesday, January 6th Idaho State Journal by Debbie Bryce, and says Interim Superintendent Doug Howell said School District 25 plans to move forward, and the window is now shut for fired school lunch lady Daylene Bowden to return to her job. Bowden was dismissed from her position at Irving Middle School last month after she gave a free lunch to a hungry student. The district offered to rehire Bowden shortly before Christmas, when the story about her firing was covered by national and international news outlets, and this district received a barrage of criticism on social media. And when you make Fox News, CNN, and ABC and all those, you've hit the jackpot. So this superintendent, Doug Howell, and I think he's just the interim superintendent, although I'm sure that he'll get the usual glad hand into the office, but pretty rocky way to have to start off. It'd be interesting to know what he had to say with his health and human resources, or whatever they call those. The human resources. We used to call him the employment director or something like that. I can't keep up with this 21st century stuff. Anyway, on Monday, District 25 officials offered Bowden a position in the central kitchen and gave her until noon to respond. Bowden said Tuesday that she did not contact the district and does not intend to return to work. And at least for a year, she probably doesn't have to, because as I recall, the last figures I saw in the newspaper, she had received something like $19,000, and I'm sure it's higher than that now, $19,000 on GoFundMe, I think that's the name of the site. And a businessman in Blackfoot or Idaho Falls, I don't recall, forked over $15,000. So in those 2 contributions, she's probably making more than she made all last year as the lunch lady. So we don't know what she'll be doing. I love the way bureaucrats can always couch things in fancy schmancy words that really sound good but don't say a whole lot. Quoting here, it says, the position we offered would have provided an avenue for her success rather than fear of failure. I love this. Howell said, the interim superintendent. There was no response to our offer of continued employment. Howell said the new position offered to Bowden had the same working hours and salary as her job as a lunch lady at Irving. And there's a bit more to this. It goes into how they do the lunches. Students can charge up to $11 on lunch accounts, and the disciplinary procedure. It's kind of difficult. Anybody who has worked in the bureaucracy, and I don't know if it's quite the same in private enterprise, but in government service, to fire somebody, you have to do quite a bit of documentation. And the fact that she was fired just before Christmas, in bad taste to say the least, they weren't really using their judgment there. Should have, put her off on paid leave or even unpaid leave, I guess, until this thing was resolved. But to do it at Christmas was pretty dumb. And so their HR person ought to get kicked right where you know where. But I suspect that they felt they had a strong enough case. And there is rumor going around, and it's nothing but rumor, that she had been a past disciplinary problem. I don't know that. But I do know that if they're doing their job properly at management and supervisory levels, there's an awful lot of documentation that has to be done before they can just can somebody. You get caught, you have to have a write-up, you have to be allowed to see the write-up, you have to acknowledge it, you don't have to say you believe in it or agree with it, and you can be given a warning, and then if it happens again, you can be further counseled or have some forfeit of pay or something like that. But it takes a lot, even in Pocatello, to just arbitrarily can somebody, unless you've got all your ducks in a row. So maybe they did. Maybe they did. There was a letter also in the paper, and this was just on the 7th. I don't know if any of you folks have had a chance. If you get downtown often, or if you're a beater, people like to do the beating, like on moccasins and belts and wherever you do them. A business downtown called Mind Your Own Beadness, run by a husband and wife couple, very nice people. I met them several years ago when I actually had a cameraman and I could go out in the field and we could talk to people, and got to meet these people. Just to show you what nice people they are, like a bull in a china shop, while we were doing the interview, I backed into a display of beads, knocked it over, and there were beads everywhere. I can tell you I was mortified, and they were so sweet about it. No biggie, no problem. It's happened before. I just couldn't tell you. They were just really nice. They're very nice people. Well, here's what was in the letter to the editor section of the paper. It says, we thank these wonderful people for taking their time to make our business a success for 5.5 years. Caleb Morrison has been with us the whole time. He's a music talent and got his start with us. He now has a band called Best by Yesterday, and his band members, Kevin, Chris, and Dylan, have also played for us on our art walks. We want to thank other bands also, like Gas, Food, and Lodging, Brett, Darren, Steve, Jared Ford of Blues, Ramona, Steve, Dan and Bob and Detour, Ramona, Dawn, and Deanna. Dawn has also brought her students, at least 12 of them, to play and sing music. We also want to thank Earl at Elmer's and Derek at Roadhouse for their soup and rolls, and Anel at Puerto Vallarta for beans and rice and beans. Anel, if you haven't been to Puerto Vallarta, good Mexican food. She is originally from Acapulco, I believe. Very nice lady, a Christian lady. Go in there and treat yourself to a meal if you haven't already done so. It continues, if we missed anyone, we are sorry. All of you and our regular customers have made us the most popular people on the Art Walk. A special thanks to Wendy Allen, our employee, for her help on Facebook. We are closing our doors because Carol has cancer, and we have to spend all of our time to fight it. This is Carol's, my wife's, third time in 23 years of marriage, and Carol is a fighter. Our advice is to think positive and never give up. Carol is my best friend. I, Jim, Carol's husband, want to thank all our friends for all of the calls, support, and most of all the hugs. There have been a lot of tears lately, but we're not going anywhere, just closing the doors. Pocatello is a great place to live. We've been here 10.5 years, and we know at least 50,000 people. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts. Jim and Carol Modica, Mind Your Own Business. Just wonderful folks. We will definitely be losing a lot by them going. Even if you're not a beater, just the fact that we've lost these two good people to the business community, it is a loss for us. All right, also another one by Debbie Bryce. This is from January 8th. A bomb threat at Highland High School Wednesday remains under investigation. Pocatello Police Chief Scott Marchand said Wednesday that school resource officers and Pocatello detectives are involved in the investigation. Director of Secondary Education Jan Harwood said Thursday that a student, who remains unidentified, told a bus driver that they had a bomb. The driver notified his supervisor, who contacted the police. Harwood declined to release any information about the student or any pending action by the school district, citing privacy laws. However, Pocatello Police said Thursday that a misdemeanor citation was issued to the underage student. Pocatello Police responded to Highland High School just after 4 p.m. Wednesday. Officers evacuated the bus and located the backpack that reportedly contained a bomb. Marchand said the officers removed the pack, which did not contain a bomb, and no explosive devices were found at the scene. Students and staff members were never in danger, police said. So you've got, when I was a kid in high school 100 years ago, we had pranksters. It's not quite as, it has a different dimension today, what with the crazies, the jihadis that are determined to destroy the world. When a kid makes some bonehead thing like this, yeah, he's a kid, but it's pretty bonehead, and I mean more so than usual. I won't talk about some of the pranks that our generation did, but there's no humor to this. And I have to say, this is something we taught years ago in Los Angeles. I'm sure that your police officers here would say the same thing. If you are any place in public and you see a strange package or an unattended package or an unattended backpack, suitcase, or anything else that to you looks out of place, talk to somebody in authority that you can get a hold of. If you're at the market, talk to the office manager, one of the managers, ask them to call the police. That's what we pay them for. Let them come and check it out. Don't you go check it out. It's a very innocent action. Many people will see something like a dropped box or something, and they'll think, oh, I got to see if I can return this. Bad move. In the old days, we could have done that. In the old days, we could have been good Samaritans and returned the dropped purse. Today, that dropped purse might be a quarter pound of plastique and blow half the building up. So if you see something like that, talk to somebody, get somebody's attention to it. Don't try to touch it, but don't be too embarrassed. Remember what I said? Stop being politically correct. Don't worry about it. In fact, I would encourage you to stop being politically correct, because somebody's life may depend upon it, maybe yours. So if you see something, tell someone and do something. Let's see, what else do we have? We're kind of eclectic today because there's been so much happening. In fact, one of the things I wanted to talk to you about, and where did I put my first notes to myself here? Hold on, don't go away. Don't go away. Nope, there we go. It was right on top. I was doing the wrong one. Okay. By now, I'm sure you've seen where this Philadelphia police officer was wounded 3 times in the arm by this mad jihadi, homegrown jihadi, who, according to his own words, said that let me back up. He had a semi-automatic pistol that was stolen apparently from a police officer sometime in the past. Somehow this jihadi, this so-called Muslim, whatever he is, well, he says he's a Muslim, so let's take him at his word. He got hold of this multiple round pistol. And you've seen the photos. You may have seen the video before it got pulled, and you can only find the photos now, where the jihadi, wearing Arab garments, the long, looks like an overgrown T-shirt that hangs down to the ankles, runs up to the car and just reaches right inside and starts wailing away, hits the officer 3 times. The officer, God bless him, boy, he I guess he's a product of his training and probably just plain angry, scared to death and angry. Actually got out with 3 bullet wounds in his arm. His arm is, the bone is broken, he has nerve damage, and he's still in critical condition as of about 4 o'clock this afternoon, according to the news, but he's stable. He actually got out and returned fire and hit this mope in the butt. And it's too bad that's the only place he hit him, but they won't be able to talk to him now because he's brain dead. He was hit in the butt. But that aside, then, well, let me read this little thing that came off the blogosphere, and we'll go back and look at this. I don't have anybody to attribute this to. It was in the blogosphere. My wife pulled it for me, and I was in such a hurry to get out the door she couldn't find out who to attribute it to, but nevertheless. Philadelphia mayor says Islam had nothing to do with the attack against the police officer. Now, the mope that they arrested tells everybody that he has done this in the name of Islam, in the name of Allah, for the purpose of jihad and all that stuff. This is the mope that did it. You'd think he'd be a kind of a strong eyewitness since he's the guy that did it. And the mayor, this fool, comes out there and says, this is not Islam. Nobody in this room thinks it was. It had nothing to do with Islam. Disregard the fact that the mope said it was Islam. All right. This morning we learned about an attack against a police officer in Philadelphia at the hands of a man who pledged allegiance to ISIS. The man fired at least 11 shots, and now it's been determined there were 13, I guess, while he was sitting at the officer while he was sitting in his patrol car, and miraculously the officer survived but was injured severely. Regardless of the fact the shooter admitted that his support of radical Islam was the reason for the attack, the mayor of Philadelphia, surprise, the Democrat, went on television and said that Islam had nothing to do with it. What? Whoa, 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 what? Wait. This goes far beyond political correctness. This is just lying. Of course it had something to do with it. The shooter admitted it did. We get it. Not all Muslims support terrorism, but why can't we talk about actual facts? The White House has gone radio silent about the shooting, as we expected. What in the world is going on with this country? Political correctness is going to be our undoing. And I mean, that pretty well nails it right there. Here's the Wall Street Journal front page, and I don't expect you to be able to see it there, but you've seen it on television. And here's the mope, the jihadi, with his gun stiff-armed out in front, running at the police car. Now, as I understand it from the news reports, he actually flagged down the police officer. So it wasn't like this was a random act. He saw a police car coming and he specifically flagged down the police officer. When the officer went over there, this member of the Religion of Peace decided to assassinate somebody so he could get into Muslim heaven. And remember, as I've shared with you before in teaching you about Islam, the only sure way for a Muslim male to get to Muslim heaven is in jihad. And that means against, an armed conflict against a non-Muslim. It says here, the man arrested for shooting a Philadelphia police officer 3 times in a late-night ambush told detectives he was inspired by the Islamic State terrorist group. Edward Archer, 30 years old, allegedly opened fire on Officer Jesse Hartnett's cruiser at a West Philadelphia intersection late Thursday night, firing about 11 times and hitting the officer in his left arm 3 times. Officer Hartnett returned fire, hitting Mr. Archer in the buttocks, therefore the guy's in a coma because he's brain dead, a police spokesman said. The mope, the suspect, the perp, whatever you want to call him, he stated that he pledges his allegiance to Islamic State, he follows Allah, and that is the reason he was called upon to do this, Captain Clark said. He just kept on echoing those sentiments, and he wouldn't give us anything more than that. So, and it's interesting. Now, you look at the fellow, he's obviously a black man, he's got a heavy beard, and I find it interesting, Black Lives Matter. But this white cop had it coming. He's a cop. He enforces laws that Islam disagrees with, and especially, of course, according to Archer, and he's white. He deserved it. That'll teach him to be white in a police suit again. Let's see what else I have in here. I've just highlighted a bunch of stuff to share with you. There's so much going on. How about this one? This one is a beaut. Now, you remember it's been about 2 or 3 weeks now when Angela Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany, opened her arms to Islam. She said, let all those Syrian refugees in here, even though 80 to 85% of them are males in the age group that would normally fight for their country, 18 to 35. But let's let all of these poor people in here. And then I showed you a film not too long ago of these people in Germany at the train station handing out balloons and saying, welcome, willkommen, we just love to have you all here. Well, interesting about this. Germany says attackers include refugees. Police chief forced out and criticism's leadership obfuscated what happened. Germany said at least 22 migrants seeking asylum were among the suspects alleged New York's Eve assaults in Cologne, the latest disclosure in the aftermath of a night of violence that has put new pressure on Chancellor Angela Merkel's welcome policy toward refugees. A spokesman for the German Interior Minister said 22 people registered as asylum seekers were among 32 suspects identified as of Friday night. This was on New Year's Eve. The identified suspects included 17 people from Algeria and Morocco, as well as 3 Germans and 1 U.S. citizen, about whom no further information was available. An additional 44 suspected assailants hadn't been identified. The alleged series of attacks and theft by migrants on New Year's Eve in the Rhineland city of 1 million people, with more than 170 complaints, largely for sexual assault, filed by victims with local police, has turned into one of Ms. Merkel's biggest domestic crises as she's tried to keep Germans behind her in welcoming refugees. Investigations also continue into alleged New Year's assaults in the cities of Hamburg and Stuttgart. In Hamburg, police said Friday they had received 108 complaints related to incidents on New Year's Eve. In Stuttgart, police have said about a dozen women had filed complaints of being groped on New Year's Eve by Arab-looking men. A young man, an Iraqi asylum seeker, was arrested in the probe. Now, why is this happening? Is it because there are these 2 or 3 bad apples in the 850,000? Well, you can put it that way, and I'm sure the left would say, hey, that's minuscule. It doesn't even make a blip on the screen out of 850 to a million, 850,000 to a million. Part of it has to do with the fact that first of all, Islam considers itself superior to everybody, every other religion, every other peoples. Women in Islam are worth less than their goats, and that's a fact. Women have no rights. And the Middle Eastern men, and I know you're going to say, Ralph, you can't say that, it's not politically correct. I'm going to say it anyway. Middle Eastern men are very fond of European women, especially redheads and blondes. Love them. And so we have to understand that Islam, there's just no self-constraint. These men couldn't help themselves. They were lured by these women being attractive in public. Come on. Yeah, there are lots and lots of reasons. I had another one in here. Maybe it's not in this one. Okay, we'll move on. So Europe has opened their arms to the Muslims, the religion of peace, and all of the Northern European countries, not just Germany. There have been some really bad clashes in Belgium, in Norway, in Sweden. Sweden has got to be the most laid-back place in the world, and even the Swedes are getting fed up with it. In Finland, it is running rampant. Let me just, a couple weeks ago I promised to give you a quote, and I forgot to do it. This is a quote from John Quincy Adams on Islam. This is old. I mean, John Quincy Adams was what, our 3rd president? Let's see what he had to say. This is a direct quote. In the 7th century of the Christian era, a wandering Arab of the lineage of Hagar, also known as Muhammad, the Egyptian, combining the powers of transcendent genius with the preternatal energy of a fanatic and the fraudulent spirit of an impostor, proclaimed himself as a messenger from heaven and spread desolation and delusion over an extensive portion of the earth. Adopting from the sublime conception of the Mosaic law the doctrine of one omnipotent God, he connected indissolubility with it the audacious falsehood that he was himself his prophet and apostle. Adopting from the new revelation of Jesus the faith and hope of immortal life and a future retribution, he humbled it to the dust by adopting all the rewards and sanctions of his religion to the gratification of the sexual passion. He positioned the sources of human facility at the fountain by degrading the condition of the female sex and the allowance of polygamy, and he declared undistinguishing and exterminating war as part of his religion against all the rest of mankind. The essence of his doctrine was violence and lust, to exalt the brutal over the spiritual part of human nature. Between these two religions, thus contrasted in their characters, a war of 1,200 years has already raged. Now, mind you, it's been 1,400 years now. This was John Quincy Adams. The war is yet flagrant, while the merciless and dissolute dogmas of the false prophet shall furnish motives to human action. There can never be peace upon earth and goodwill towards men. And that was from John Quincy Adams on the religion of peace. So what we're seeing is, among other things, nothing new, and it has been noted for at least 2 centuries by people with the gravitas of a former president, John Quincy Adams. Okay. Well, here's one that you'll hopefully find interesting. And boy, you know this is going to this is going to get a lot more play. I don't know if it's being deliberately played down, because I haven't seen as much as I might have expected. And I was quite surprised to see this in the Idaho State Journal, but it was in there, and that's good. It's actually an Associated Press release from Friday, January 8th. It's out of Associated Press out of Salt Lake City. The Utah man who created a dating website for white people says it is not racially motivated. Sam Russell says he founded wherewhitepeoplemeet.com excuse me, after seeing TV ads for targeted sites like blackpeoplemeet.com, farmersonly.com, and LDSsingles.com. Russell, who lives in Bountiful, Utah, launched the website in December and put up a billboard in West Valley City last weekend. Amid national media exposure, the site's membership has risen from 5 last Thursday to more than 1,000 on Monday. Russell says the site is open to anyone regardless of race and will be moderated for racist content. Salt Lake Community College student Matthew Wong, who serves as an inclusivity ambassador for the school, says dating sites for racial and ethnic minorities help people find others with similar backgrounds. He says wherewhitepeoplemeet.com is unnecessary in a majority white population. Well, now isn't that interesting? The left-leaning commie pinko bedwetter press is upset because this man had the audacity as a white man to suggest that there should be a meeting place for white people. Now, in another article that I read subsequent to this, he points out that anybody, he said, it doesn't matter what race you are, anybody can apply here, ostensibly, I guess, looking for a white partner, but that it is aimed at the white audience. And yet nobody cares about, there are sites for Asians, Filipinos, there are sites for blacks, Hispanics, LGBTQ. I mean, there are all kinds of sites on there, but the only one that seems to get any attention, and derisive attention usually, is some fool had the audacity to be white and perhaps be proud of it and think that it might be a good idea to start a dating line for white people. And right away, he is the pariah. I'm sure that Jester Jackson and Al Shakedown are en route as we speak with a mob to picket this poor guy. Isn't it interesting that in the U.S. Congress, you have a black caucus, you have an Hispanic caucus, I believe there's an Asian caucus, I'm not sure, Asian Pacific Islander, 1 or 2 female caucuses, no white caucuses. You wouldn't dare. How dare you even think such a racist thought that a white person may want to affiliate with other white people or have an opinion that might not be politically acceptable? Well, one of the big things that we're getting a lot of steam and a lot of wind on this week, and that's this thing that's going on up in Oregon, where the Bundy family are helping some ranchers up there. And as I was coming into the film this afternoon, I heard that they had actually, the group, and I don't know if it's Bundy or just the group, the militia, whatever it is, had taken control or taken possession of some federal buildings, some government buildings. And I didn't get the whole story. It was just a tease, and I didn't get to hear the whole thing. But I was at a meeting with some friends the other night, and one of my friends said, "Ralph, you got to see this." He said, do you know who the Bundys are? And I had to stop and think about it. I said, well, I think I know which one. He said, you know the guys up in Nevada that protected their ranch from the government? I said, oh, yeah, sure. What about them? He said, well, you've seen all the stuff in the news lately. And I said, well, I've seen some of it. He said, have you seen the backstory on that? And I said, no. All I know is what I've been seeing on television so far. I didn't know there was a backstory. He said, let me send it to you, which he did. I want to share this with you because you're not going to get this from the media. It's a little lengthy, so I implore you to please bear with me. I'll try to make it interesting as we're reading it. It can be a little dry, but there is a backstory here that is very interesting. Now, let me back up and say for a minute that, as you know, the liberal press or the progressive press, however you want to characterize them, however they characterize themselves, will go out of their way to destroy anybody that doesn't march in politically correct lockstep with them. And certainly this rancher and these ranchers who are defying the feds and defying the county sheriff and who knows who else, they're not in lockstep politically, and so they need to be crushed, right? It's the American way. If you're not going along with the news, then you need to be crushed. So what we've heard so far makes it sound, in fact, Mike O'Donnell wrote an article in yesterday's ISJ talking about this, and for lack of better terms, in essence calling these people boneheads for getting involved in this. And and it's a well-written article. It's written with his liberal slant, as you might expect, and it does make sense. And if you don't have the backstory, it does have a ring of truth to it. But let's take a look at the backstory. Now this is the long version, so bear with me because I'm going to give you the history, details, and so on. History. The Harney Basin, where the Hammond Ranch is established, and that's where this problem started, was settled in the 1870s. The valley was settled by multiple ranchers and was known to have run over 300,000 head of cattle. These ranchers developed a state-of-the-art irrigated system to water the meadows, and it soon became a favorite stopping place for migrating birds on their annual trek north. Pardon me. In 1908, President Theodore Roosevelt, in a political scheme, created an Indian reservation around the Malheur, I'm probably not pronouncing this right, Malheur, Mud, and Harney Lakes, and declared it as a preserve and breeding ground for native birds. Later, this Indian reservation, without Indians, became the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge. In 1964, the Hammonds purchased their ranch in the Harney Basin. The purchase included approximately 6,000 acres of private property, 4 grazing rights on public land, a small ranch house, and 3 water rights. The ranch is around 53 miles south of Burns, Oregon. By the 1970s, nearly all the ranches adjacent to the Blitzen Valley were purchased by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, FWS, and added to the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge. The refuge covers over 187,000 acres and stretches over 45 miles long and 37 miles wide. The expansion of the refuge grew and surrounds the Hammonds Ranch. Being approached many times by the Fish and Wildlife Service, the Hammonds refused to sell. Other ranchers also chose not to sell. During the 1970s, the Fish and Wildlife Service, in conjunction with the Bureau of Land Management, BLM, took a different approach to get the ranchers to sell. Now they're trying to expand this so-called Indian reservation that has no Indians. Ranchers were told that grazing was detrimental to wildlife and must be reduced. 32 of 53 permits were revoked, and many ranches were forced to leave. Grazing fees were raised significantly for those who were allowed to remain. Refuge personnel took over the irrigation system, claiming it as their own, so the government snatched the water. By 1980, a conflict was well on its way over water allocations on the adjacent privately owned Sylvia's Plain. The FWS wanted to acquire the ranch lands on the Sylvia's Plain to add to their already vast holdings. Refuge personnel intentionally diverted the water to bypass the vast meadowlands, directing the water into the rising Malheur Lakes. Within a few short years, the surface area of the lakes doubled. 31 ranches on the Sylvia's Plains were flooded. Homes, corrals, barns, and grazeland were washed away and destroyed. Remember to always beware if the government says we're here to help you. The ranchers that once fought to keep the FWS from taking their land, now broke and destroyed, begged the FWS to acquire their useless ranches. Remember, these were prospering ranches prior to the government deciding they wanted them. And who is the government? Do you remember from your civics class 100 years ago? It's you and me. Voters, taxpayers, citizens. In 1989, the waters began to recede, and now the once thriving privately owned Sylvia's Plains are a proud part of the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge claimed by the FWS. By the 1990s, the Hammonds were one of the very few ranchers that still owned private property adjacent to the refuge. Susie Hammond, in an effort to make sense of what was going on, began compiling facts about the refuge. In a hidden public record, she found a study that was done by the FWS in 1975. The study showed that the no-use policies of the FWS on the refuge were causing the wildlife to leave the refuge and move to private property. So the FWS, the feds, said, you can't use this anymore. And so the wildlife, because the property was no longer being maintained properly or whatever, they started going to the private property. They left the so-called refuge. The study showed that the private property adjacent to the Mullauer Wildlife Refuge produced 4 times more ducks and geese than the refuge did. It also showed that the migrating birds were 13 times more likely to land on private property than on the refuge. What good's a refuge? When Susie brought this to the attention of the FWS and refuge personnel, she and her family became the subjects of a long train of abuses and corruptions. In the early 1990s, the Hammonds filed on a livestock water source and obtained a deed for the water right from the state of Oregon. When the Bureau of Land Management, BLM, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, FWS, found out that the Hammonds obtained new water rights near the Mullauer Wildlife Refuge, they were agitated and became belligerent and vindictive toward the Hammonds. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service challenged the Hammonds' right to the water in an Oregon State Circuit Court. The court found that the Hammonds legally obtained rights to the water in accordance to state law, and therefore the use of the water belongs to the Hammonds. In August of 1994, the BLM and FWS illegally began building a fence around the Hammonds' water source. Owning the water rights and knowing that their cattle relied on that water source, the Hammonds tried to stop the building with a fence. The BLM and FWS called the Harney County Sheriff's Department and had Dwight Hammond arrested, the father. Had him arrested and charged with disturbing and interfering with federal officers on federal contractors, 2 counts each felony. He spent one night in the Deschutes County Jail in Bend and a second night behind bars in Portland before he was hauled before a federal magistrate and released without bail. A hearing on the charges was postponed, and the federal judge never set another date. The FWS also began restricting access to upper pieces of the Hammonds' private property. In order to get to the upper part of the Hammonds Ranch, they had to go on a road that went through the Mullauer Wildlife Ranch, or Refuge. The FDS began barricading the road and threatening the Hammonds if they drove through it. The Hammonds removed the barricades and gates and continued to use their right of access. The road was proven later to be owned by the county of Harney. This further enraged the BLM and the FWS. And you may know that. We live in a rural county here. There's a lot of BLM land around us. The BLM are very regularly bullies. I mean, it's just as simple as that. Now, they have no problem because, after all, they're the government. They outrank you mere civilians. And they have no problem with bullying when it's appropriate to whatever they need. Shortly after the road and water disputes, the BLM and FWS arbitrarily revoked the Hammonds' upper grazing permit without any given cause, court proceeding, or court ruling. As a traditional fence-out state, Oregon requires no obligation on the part of an owner to keep his or her livestock within a fence or to maintain control over the movement of the livestock. The Hammonds intended to still use their private property for grazing. However, they were informed that a federal judge ruled in a federal court that the federal government did not have to observe the Oregon fence-out law. Those laws are for the people, not for them. Or for the people, not for them. The Hammonds were first forced to either build and maintain miles of fences or be restricted from the use of their private property. Cutting their ranch in almost half, they could not afford to fence the land, so the cattle were removed. The Hammonds experienced many years of financial hardship due to the ranch being diminished. The Hammonds had to sell their ranch and home in order to purchase another property that had enough grass to feed their cattle. This property included 2 grazing rights on public land. Those were also arbitrarily revoked later. The owner of the Hammonds' original ranch passed away from a heart attack, and the Hammonds made a trade for the ranch to get it back. In the early fall of 2001, Stephen Hammond, the son, called the fire department, informing them that he was going to be performing a routine prescribed burn on their ranch. Later that day, he started a prescribed fire on their private property. The fire went onto public land and burned 127 acres of grass. The Hammonds put the fire out themselves. There was no communication about the burn from the federal government to the Hammonds at that time. Prescribed fires are a common method that Native Americans and ranchers have used in the area to increase the health and productivity of the land for many centuries. In 2006, a massive lightning storm started multiple fires that joined together, inflaming the countryside. To prevent the fire from destroying their winter range and possibly their home, Stephen Hammond, the son, started a backfire on their private property. The backfire was successful in putting out the lightning fires that had covered thousands of acres within a short period of time. The backfire saved much of the range and vegetation needed to feed the cattle through the winter. Stephen's mother, Susan Hammond, said, "The backfire worked perfectly. It put out the fire, saved the range, and possibly our home." The next day, federal agents went to the Harney County Sheriff's Office and filed a police report making accusation against Dwight and Stephen Hammond for starting the backfire. A few days after the backfire, a range con from the Burns District BLM office asked Stephen if he would meet him in town, that's in the French Glen, for coffee. Stephen accepted. When leaving, he was arrested by the Harney County Sheriff Dave Glerup and BLM Ranger Orr. Sheriff Glerup then ordered him to go to the ranch and bring back his father. Both Dwight and Stephen were booked on multiple Oregon state charges. The Harney County District Attorney reviewed the accusation, evidence, and charges and determined that the accusations against Dwight and Stephen Hammond did not warrant prosecution and dropped all the charges. You seeing a pattern here yet? In 2011, 5 years after the police report was taken, the U.S. Attorney Office accused Dwight and Stephen Hammond of completely different charges. They accused them of being terrorists under the Federal Anti-Terrorism Effective Death Penalty Act of 1996. This act carries a minimum sentence of 5 years in prison and a maximum sentence of death. Dwight and Stephen's mugshots were all over the news the next week, posing them as arsonists. Susan Hammond, wife and mother, said, "I would walk down the street and go in a store. People I'd known for years would take extreme measures to avoid me." Shortly after the sentencing, Capital Press ran a story about the Hammonds. A person who identified as Greg Allum, A-L-L-U-M, posted 3 comments on the article, calling the ranchers clowns who endangered firefighters and their people in the area while burning valuable rangeland. Greg Allum, a retired BLM heavy equipment operator, soon called Capital Press to complain that he had not made these comments and requested that they be taken down from the website. Capital Press removed the comments. A search of the Internet Protocol address associated with the comments revealed that it is owned by the BLM's office in Denver, Colorado. Allum said he is friends with the Hammonds and was alerted to the comments by neighbors who knew he wouldn't have written them. "I feel bad for them. They lost a lot, and they're going to lose more," Allum said of the ranchers. "They are not terrorists. There's this hatred in the BLM for them, and I don't get it," the retired BLM employee said. Jody Weil, Deputy State Director for Communications at BLM's Oregon office, indicated to reporters that if one of their agents falsified the comments, they would keep it private and not inform the public. Sounds kind of like a Hillary thing. Just because we broke the law, we're not going to tell anybody. Duh. In September 2006, Dwight and Susan Hammond's home was raided. But think of what we're talking about here now. The government, the big brother, the brute, the agents informed the Hammonds that they were looking for evidence that would connect them to the fires. Now, what kind of evidence? What are they going to look for? Some matches, some flares, some candles? The Hammonds later found out that a boot print and a tire track were found near one of the many fires. No matching boots or tires were found in the Hammonds' home or on their property. Susan Hammond, wife, later said, "I've never felt so violated in my life. We are ranchers, not criminals." Stephen Hammond openly maintains his testimony that he started the backfire to save the winter grass from being destroyed, and that the backfire ended up working so well it put out the fire entirely, altogether. During the trial proceedings, federal court judge Michael Hogan did not allow time for certain testimonies and evidence into the trial that would exonerate the Hammonds. Federal prosecuting attorney Frank Papagani was given full access for 6 days. He had ample time to use any evidence or testimony that strengthened the demonization of the Hammonds. The Hammonds' attorney was only allowed 1 day. Much of the facts about the fires, land, and why the Hammonds acted the way they did was not allowed into the proceedings and was not heard by the jury. For example, Judge Hogan did not allow time for the jury to hear or review certified scientific findings that the fires improved the health and productivity of the land, or that the Hammonds had been subjected to vindictive behavior by multiple federal agencies for years. So it's basically a kangaroo court. The BLM wants your property, you resist, they take you down. Federal attorneys Frank Papagani hunted down a witness that was not mentally capable to be a credible witness. Dusty Hammond, grandson and nephew, testified that Stephen told him to start a fire. He was 13 at the time and 24 when he testified, 11 years later. At 24, Dusty had been suffering from mental problems for many years. He had estranged his family, including his mother. Judge Hogan noticed that Dusty's memories as a 13-year-old boy were not clear or credible. Now, that's the judge that noticed this. He allowed the prosecution to continually use Dusty's testimony anyway. When speaking to the Hammonds about this testimony, they understood that Dusty was manipulated and expressed nothing but love for their troubled grandson. Judge Michael Hogan and Frank Papagani tampered with the jury many times throughout the proceedings, including during the selection process. Hogan and Papagani only allowed people on the jury who did not understand the customs and cultures of the ranchers or how the land is used and cared for in the Diamond Valley. All of the jurors had to drive back and forth to Pendleton every day. Some drove more than 2 hours each way. By day 8, they were exhausted and expressed desire to go home. On the final day, Judge Hogan kept pushing them to make a verdict. Several times during deliberation, Judge Hogan pushed them to make a decision. Judge Hogan also would not allow the jury to hear what punishment could be imposed upon an individual that was convicted as a terrorist under the 1996 Act. The jury, not understanding the customs and cultures of the area, influenced by the prosecutors for 6 straight days, very exhausted, pushed for a verdict by the judge, unaware of the ramification of convicting someone as a terrorist, made a verdict and went home. June 22, 2012. Dwight and Stephen were found guilty of starting both the 2001 and the 2006 fires by the jury. However, the federal courts convicted them both as terrorists under the 1996 Anti-Terrorism Act. Judge Hogan sentenced Dwight, the father, to 3 months in prison and Stephen, the son, to 12 months in federal prison. They were also stipulated to pay $400,000 to the BLM. Hogan, overruling the minimum terrorist sentence, commenting that if the full 5 years were required, it would be a violation of the Eighth Amendment, cruel and unusual punishment. The day of the sentencing, Judge Hogan retired as a federal judge. In his honor, the staff served chocolate cake in the courtroom. On January 4, 2013, Dwight and Stephen reported to prison. They fulfilled their sentences. Dwight 3 months, Stephen 12 months. Dwight was released in March 2013, Stephen January 2014. Sometime in June 2014, Rhonda Cargis, field manager of the BLM, and her husband, Chad Cargis, refuge manager for the Mulhauer Wildlife Refuge, which surrounds the Hammond Ranch, along with attorney Frank Papagani, exemplifying further vindictive behavior by filing an appeal with the 9th District Federal Court, seeking Dwight's and Stephen's return to federal prison for the entire 5 years. In October 2015, the 9th District Court resentenced Dwight and Stephen, requiring them to return to prison for several more years. Stephen, 46, has a wife and 3 children. Dwight, 74, will leave Susan, 74, to be alone after 55 years of marriage. If he survives, he will be 79 when he is released. During the court proceeding, the Hammonds were forced to grant the BLM first right of refusal. If the Hammonds ever sold their ranch, they would have to sell to the BLM. Dwight and Stephen are ordered to report to federal prison again on January 4, 2016, just a few days ago, to begin their resentencing. Both their wives will have to manage the ranch for several years without them. To date, they have paid $200,000 to the BLM, and the remainder, $200,000, must be paid before the end of this year, 2015, which just ended. If the Hammonds cannot pay the fines to the BLM, they will be forced to sell the ranch to the BLM or face further prosecution. After a protest rally supporting the Hammond family yesterday, and I don't have the date on this story, a pre-planned group, including the Bundy brothers, left a peaceful protest at the Harney County Sheriff's Office and went to the closed for the holiday Mulauer Wildlife Range, where they have seized and occupied the refuge headquarters. And there, forget the fellow's name that we all love, there you have the rest of the story. Now, does this vindicate the Bundy folks from defying the federal authorities? Pardon me. Philosophically, yes. Legally, no. I mean, let's face it. When Big Brother decides he wants what you want, what you have, you as the little guy really have not much choice. Big Brother is going to take what Big Brother wants. Unless you think you live in a free society, think again. Think about the Hammonds. Think about the Bundys when the authorities decided they wanted their ranch land. I must say that I have mixed emotions about this thing because, like many who are, I guess you could say I'm ultra-conservative, I really don't like Big Brother telling me what I must do or must not do, especially when it only benefits Big Brother. Big Brother, you know, we used to think as Uncle Sam, the U.S., you and me, us. Not any longer. Now it's whoever's running the government, and heaven help us, the government has been run by charlatans, frauds, and thieves now for at least 60 years, maybe more. Okay, did you see this thing in the also in the Wall Street Journal? Didn't get much play elsewhere, where the Saudis have broken with Iran on the fuel crisis. The Saudis and the Iran, you know, that now that Sheikh Obama is going to return $150 billion to them to allow them to continue their terrorist activities. Now Iran is going to jack up their oil production, trying to get more money. And the Saudis are refusing to back down on the oil production, so there's a glut on the market, and so there's a beef going on here. Well, as you well know, the Saudis, and you know, this is really an interesting beef. It would be, to use a bad metaphor, a bad example, be like the Episcopalians and the Presbyterians, both Trinitarian Christian organizations believing in the same God of Abraham, Jacob, Isaac and Jacob. It would be as if they were going after each other. The Saudis, who are Sunni, and the Iranians, who are Shia, are going after each other, and Saudis executed a Shia cleric. The Iranians are overwhelmed with anger and grief. They have a really interesting way to show grief and anger in their religion. So the Saudi embassy was sacked and burned, and I don't even know what happened to the Saudi ambassador and their people. But now there's a big schism between these two. Well, it's interesting now because, you know, we've all been watching as the Obamianists, Sheikh Obamianist guys have put their thumb in the eye of Israel for years, keeping Israel from doing what they need to do, which is bomb the Iranian nuke things right off the face of the planet, which they have the capability of doing as far as the bombs to deliver, but they have no way to get over there and back. So they need some place where they can refuel their jets and go in there and just wipe the Iranian army and their nukes off the face of the earth. Well, now the Iranians are far more militarily powerful than the Saudis. The Saudis are distracted by a war in Yemen, trying to keep in control of things down there. And even though we supply the Saudis with 99% of their materials, they really don't have the army capable of standing up to Iran, as I understand it. And, you know, we trained both of them, which is all interesting in its own right. Pardon me. But apparently the Iranians got it better than the Saudis did. So now the Saudis are very quietly in the back channels making friendly with the Israelis, because the Israelis will do what they have to do. Israel is under the gun 24/7, 365. And I'm sure they would just love to level the Iranian nuke business. So it's interesting to see these two religions of peace as they're both deciding how they're going to destroy each other. Quickly in here, we've got just a couple minutes. See if there's anything in here. Couldn't bring these up on the internet to read them to you or to to make it easier to read. So I'm here with the whole newspaper, and that doesn't make it any too easy. How about the missile, the U.S. missile that showed up in Cuba? Have you seen this? Now, this is one of our state-of-the-art missiles. It was an inert missile used for training, but the electronics in there are our state-of-the-art stuff, and it got to Cuba. Well, this is interesting. An inert U.S. Hellfire missile sent to Europe for training purposes was wrongly shipped from there to Cuba in 2014, said people familiar with the matter, a loss of sensitive military technology that ranks among the worst known incidents of its kind. And see if I can find the rest of this. It gets very interesting. The thing that puzzled me, and maybe puzzled you more than anything, is why were we shipping this highly classified, perhaps top secret missile? Well, here we go. The missile was sent from Orlando International Airport in early 2014 to be used in North Atlantic Treaty Organization military exercise, said the people familiar with the case. As with other sensitive military gear, the shipping crate was clearly marked as containing material subject to rigorous export controls. The missile was sent by its manufacturer, Lockheed Martin Corporation, after the company got permission from the State Department, which oversees the sharing of sensitive military technology with allies. The missile was packaged in Rota, Spain, a U.S. official said, where it was put into the truck belonging to another freight shipping firm. It's like sending it UPS. That trucking company released the missile to yet another shipping firm that was supposed to put the missile on a flight originating in Madrid. There's more to this, but my question would be, why is this going by civilian air? Why isn't this going by our own military aircraft? We're shipping the most sensitive stuff we have in the world. That's like shipping an atomic bomb by UPS. How crazy is this government? Well, folks, that's about it. We've covered. I know the thing about the Hammonds was kind of lengthy, but that's the backstory on all the stuff you've been seeing on television. So chew on that. Next time you hear about how these nutcase militias are doing criminal things up there in Oregon, think a little bit about what precipitated all of this stuff. In the meantime, I'm so glad you joined us. I hope you'll join us again next Wednesday. In the meantime, God bless you and yours. Pray for our nation. Pray for Israel. And remember, do not be politically correct because it could be detrimental to our health. God bless you. Good night.